Welcome to Unlocking Human Potential with me, your host, Andy Hosgood, a podcast dedicated to exploring what really takes psychologically, behaviourally and practically to help humans thrive through conversations with leaders, founders, coaches, behavioural experts and people shaping how humans perform and grow. Is this for you? Well, if you're a leader, a founder, a business owner, an ambitious professional who wants to do more than just perform, they want to grow, inspire, bringing the best out of yourself and the people around you, then the mission is simple: to explore how individuals and teams unlock potential in themselves, in others, and the organisations they shape. Each episode is a deep but relaxed conversation built around three core questions. How do we optimise ourselves? How do we unlock potential in others? And what's the best advice that our guests can give to you, the listener? So now over to this episode. I really hope you find it helpful and insightful. So, Richmond, thank you very much for joining me.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this. We've spoken a couple of times and I always find personally and selfishly really energized from our conversations. So, you know, when we were setting this podcast up, I was selfishly, you're one of the first person I dropped a message to said, like, I'd love to have this conversation. So the idea of this podcast is in kind of three sections. Shortly, I'll invite you to give yourself a little introduction. But what we're really key at looking at is understanding self. So it'd be really interesting to explore what is it that you do to keep yourself optimal. And then we can explore what that looks like and what people can use from that. And then how, in the work that you do, how can we help leaders? It might be business owners, it might be founders. They're the kind of people that are listening to this. You might be busy professionals. How do we help get the best out of other people? And what can we be doing to support, optimize other people? And then we're just going to wrap it up at the end with just some advice that you think that maybe that you've taken along the way that you wish if you'd had early on in your career and you had now, what would that be? Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
So I'll hand over to you. It'd be great just to let the listeners know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'll give the short version because it's quite a long story. So I've sort of got multiple hats that blend into one. What I do now and have done for many years is help people with sort of chronic, complex, difficult health situations. Chronic pain is probably the main vehicle, but then, movement disorders, mental illness. I mean, it's a wide range, but essentially people that are really stuck. And by the time they come to me, they've often seen a lot of people, but they kind of have a sense that they can transform something. They want to make the transformation, but they don't know how.
Okay.
And so about 20 odd years ago, I guess it was now, I sort of came up with the idea of calling it pain coaching, because I felt that coaching was the approach that I could take to really helping people by putting them front and center, really seeing them with their capabilities and strengths, and to help them to harness that, to really focus on what they want rather than what they don't want, because our system is very much about what people don't want. It's a real focus on pain. And a long time ago, I sort of realized that the more you focus on the pain and the painful bits of the body, the worse the outcome. Whereas the more you focus on the person and the kind of life they wanted to lead, the better the outcome, because together you can collaborate, create a strategy, and then populate that with skills, because it's all skill based. Overcoming pain or transforming pain is about transforming your life. So these kinds of insights I've had from lots of different places brought that together. My sort of background in nursing, rehabilitation, S&C, exercise physiology, pain neuroscience, strength-based coaching, positive psychology, blah, 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 all those things. I mean, I don't really think about those things, to be honest. They're just sort of, lists of things that I did, but it sort of comes together in a very practical way now. So that's probably the short version. I've left out the bit where I was a private detective, but maybe that's for another chat.
Oh, now that my curiosity is certainly raised. So let me just note that for time at the end and then we can explore that. And I think it's really nice that, having conversations around you and this coaching approach that you do and this human-centered approach, I think is certainly that aligns. It's what brought us together when we were chatting, Dublin. I think it's really, really good. So I guess I'm just curious, what is it you're curious about at the moment? where does your interest of curiosity sit at the moment?
Where do I begin on that? I mean, like you, I'm fascinated in lots of different things. I mean, I've always drawn on a wide range of fields, from neuroscience through to, I mean, I've been interested in and practiced meditation and Buddhist psychology for many years. So I'm always curious about that. But I suppose in essence, I'm curious about people's experiences. I'm curious about how is it that we, with our kind of meat suit and physiology, have these experiences? I mean, these sort of big questions of consciousness, but I think are highly relevant to the work that I do, the help that I offer, because essentially, we're trying to help people to sculpt and create better experiences. I often use the phrase "live yourself better" because everything we think and do has some sort of impact, and we need to realize or wake up to what that is, because it's all information and we can use. Is that working or not? Is that taking me in the direction I want to go or not? So I'm very curious about that. But I'm also curious about, this could be a long list, by the way.
It's okay. Good.
I'm also curious about how is it that we communicate? How do we communicate? How are we? What is the effect of our approach, our way of being, within that collaboration, or even forming that collaboration? I sometimes call it the caring crucible, within which the magic seems to happen. And when I say magic, I mean this change. We have capability to change as human beings. So I'm curious about how can we harness, or what can we harness in order to do that in its simplest terms or simplest methods,
Mm.
or approaches. Because we know that when someone sits and they tell you about themselves, and you give them it sounds a bit sort of hierarchical, doesn't it? You create the space within which they feel safe to talk about themselves, and that just feels amazing to do that. When you know someone who you can sit with and you feel really safe talking to them without thinking, "Oh, this is safe," but you just sort of feel that you can be open. I think that's transformative. And I don't know, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess with that, I was just gonna, maybe it was something we'll explore, when we're looking at unlocking others. I just think because it's a really important topic, and one, I'm having a lot of conversations around. So is there anything that you would do around how to create that environment? Because I really hear what you're saying is the importance of having that environment for people to explore those conversations. And we're singing very much from the same hymn sheet with that. I think that is the that psychological safety thing, that part of creating, the environment where you can lean into curiosity and not judgment, and you feel non-judged. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious, is there anything that you could share to how to create that environment effectively?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's probably a difference in some senses between being in person and online. So a lot of the stuff I do now is online because I can work with people wherever, and that's been the case for a long time. But I think you can still create that connect. Well, you can create that connection.
Mhm.
I think at the heart of it is listening. But to do that, you've got to be quiet within yourself. You have to be present yourself. And I think this is one of the greatest gifts we can give each other as human beings is our presence, is truly being there. So the person there's a feel to that. When someone's really listening. And a lot of the people I see, they've been struggling for a long time, and many have had experiences where they don't feel heard. They don't feel that they've really been listened to. Their story hasn't been validated. They're not been taken seriously. They've been dismissed. They've been told it's psychological and all this sort of thing. So unfortunately, people can then start to identify with that and even question themselves. And a lot of that can then be deep rooted in, old limiting beliefs. We all have limiting beliefs that are sort of bestowed upon us. We're conditioned to relate to ourselves in particular ways. I'm only good enough if, or I'll only be accepted if, I'm only lovable if, blah, blah, blah. But those are serious constraints in terms of, freedom and possibility is available to all of us. It's already here. But it won't be apparent if you're caught up in limiting beliefs.
That's a
So
really powerful
so
insight.
yeah, so we really, so we need to get to the essence of that. So for example, when I first meet someone, and in the ongoing conversations, I'll be asking them, what are your, take pain as the example, what do you believe are the causes of your pain. And I use that word causes on purpose because most people conflate or confuse causes and catalysts. So they'll believe that an injury, for example, or a trauma is the cause of their pain, but it isn't. It's a catalyst. It's triggered the pain, but the body systems already knew how to generate that pain. So the causes reside in how the body system's there to essentially to protect us, which is their job, and to keep us alive, reside within the way that they've evolved throughout that whole lifetime, or depending on your beliefs, perhaps lifetimes before or whatever. But essentially in this one, so when that thing happens, boom, the systems then respond in that way, and it's part of protection, it's part of survival. But if they believe that it's because they've been told or because of our biomedical system, which essentially doesn't explain pain at all, is because of a disc or a muscle or a nerve or whatever, then it's not for me to dismiss that. It's for me to hear it and understand it, and then help the person understand what the true causes are and the difference between that and catalyst, because then that reveals the way forward. So that's all within conversation. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot, and I think it's really powerful. If I could just share what I heard from that and just with my reflections, it's the ability, holding that space to listen, and then, and it's like the use of words. And you said you choose to use the word cause, and I'm assuming, and it's an assumption, that what you then do is hear for the words that they're saying, because that is going to give you some indications of what their limited beliefs might be by the language that they use.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it.
Okay.
That's absolutely it.
And I think it's really interesting and really powerful, because there's going to be people listening. The classic thing, I think, especially from both of our backgrounds in healthcare, and we see it a lot with the younger or less experienced or familiar kind of therapists, are when someone's talking, what they're actually thinking about is, what's the next question I'm going to ask, rather than listening to the answer, interpreting the answer, and then going, oh, actually, what I'm hearing is this, this, this.
Yeah.
Let's go on that thing. They're actually going, all right, okay, the next question I've got to ask is, so actually not actually listening. So I think it's really powerful what you're saying.
Yeah.
So just going on that, and again, it's an assumption that, if someone has these limited beliefs in his pain, and they're coming onto those calls, they're obviously, and what we know with a lot of people that maybe work on their own or are leaders, and they're taking on, if it's trauma or it's other people's problems, how do you then keep yourself operating at your best? And what would be good to do is explore, how do you optimize yourself? Now that might be the mindset. I know you've already touched on some of the stuff, what habits you might use, what principles you might use, and anything that kind of has helped you stay in, I like the word present, aligned, effective, and also fulfilled with what you're doing. So it'd be good to explore that if you could.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just to make a quick point on, we could substitute the word pain for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Depression, anxiety, addiction. Yeah. So people who, leaders, managers, coaches, those kinds of people who are not sort of in healthcare, because initially you might be thinking, oh, they're just talking about pain here, but actually that's just an example.
Yeah.
And quite often, I end up working with people on some of those other areas, around communication, or around teams, or around the well-being of the teams or staff, because that's essentially what I do, or help guide people from where they are, which is their struggles and challenges, to form a strategy and then populate it with skills to get to where they want, or where they hope to be, or where they prefer to be.
Yeah.
And again, I use those words on purpose, because most people will be familiar with, oh, well, I want this, this, and this. What they may not have clocked is the fact that what we want and what we need are different, but also we don't know how things are going to turn out, because no one knows the future.
Yeah.
So I might want to get fit in a particular way and do a marathon. That's my goal. The issue I have as a human, and as the way we've been conditioned to think, is we can get very attached to those outcomes and goals. We can get very attached to all sorts of things. And therein lies an issue for us, because we don't know how it's going to turn out. And we can spend a lot of time thinking about this thing that we want that doesn't exist in the future. And the extent to which things are different to how they are is the extent to which we then suffer.
Okay.
But we don't necessarily know that unless we're present and aware. So in other words, people are just caught up in their stories, and the future doesn't exist and the past doesn't exist. All there is now. Now's the only moment. So coming back, or wheeling back to your original question.
But it's good. I think it was a really good, interesting thing, because I think it lead into how, because my follow-up question would be great. And how do you, what advice, like, do you do to stay present or be present?
Yeah, so that's it, you see.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've meditated since I was about 18, and I've
Okay.
been interested in for want of a better term, Buddhist psychology and philosophy for a long time, and probably particularly the last 15 years. And that's been very informative, because Buddhism is really about examining the experience. So, Buddha was very much along the lines of, don't just listen to what I say, examine your own experience, learn. You've got everything here you need to do that, to become enlightened, to be able to see, to wake up. And it's very, very practical. So both personally and professionally, it kind of weaves in without me being a monk, which you can clearly see I'm not.
Oh. So just, I guess, where would, there's someone listening and think, and is now kind of recognizing the importance of being present, and I think you made a really nice kind of point where you said, like, we create a goal in the future, but actually, all we can control and all we can be is present.
Yeah.
And you said, there's certainly some things that's worked for you. We've talked about the kind of Buddhist psychology part that you do and the meditation. If people are listening and thinking, all right, okay, so how can I start? Where would you kind of lead them, or what would the starting point for somebody?
Yeah, so I used to be of the opinion that you could just sort of practice meditation without really having an understanding of Buddhist psychology, and I then realized no, that's not going to work, because unfortunately, again, what we've done in the West, we sort of hoiked meditation out of a whole philosophy and made it into a commodity. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about what meditation is. I mean, meditation basically is about not interfering with what's happening.
Okay.
And essentially, as you practice, you realize that the things you identify with, that your stories, who you think you are, all that sort of stuff is essentially just an illusion that we create and then live by and then suffer because it's not actually that. So you mentioned self earlier. I mean, when you look for the self, you quickly realize there isn't one there. What you have is just a matter of experience. We're experiencing something right now, and that's it. When you turn the attention back on yourself, you realize, well, what's there?
Yeah.
You're made up of lots of what you could call non-self. I'm made up of all sorts of things, really, as a you. And then if you think about, the predictive processing model, which has been around for quite a few years now, but essentially talks of how all of our experience are being generated as predictions or best guesses, and that includes the world and ourselves in it. So what I'm experiencing right now is as my body system's best guess about the possible causes of all the sensory information in and around me. And then generating this. So I see the world not as it is, but as I am. So a lot of it really is around inner engineering. And of course, what we've been trained to do in the West is to look for external causes, for external reasons, external things to blame for how we feel, which misses the point, because I feel the way I feel because of my systems, and I need to take responsibility for that. Now, that's not a blame thing. It's not about self-blame and another stick to hit yourself with. It's just having understanding of the reality and the truth of things. So if I'm angry because someone said something, it's not because they said something, that's the trigger, but that's not the cause. I already had the anger in me. So if I don't want to feel anger, then I need to understand that and see deeply into the true causes, and then I can address them. And by addressing them and doing my inner engineering, then I'll no longer be angry. So these life shows up in these different ways for us, not to us. If you think it's to you, you're then taking the victim role and you'll feel powerless. It's not because you're powerless, though. It's because that's your belief. It's not the truth. And this is what I mean by, our beliefs are upstream of all our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and experiences. So until you update the beliefs, then you can only have certain thoughts and you can only see a certain world. So if you want to transform your experiences, then you have to start there. No one can do it for you. There's no fixes for pain. Pain's not even asking for a fix. It's asking for a shift in what you're thinking and doing and how you're living. So there's a lot of misunderstandings which suit the Western philosophy and the marketplace, but are not actually what it's about. Think about painkillers. I mean, pain's not asking to be killed. Pain's not asking to just be gotten rid of. It's asking to be understood. Hunger's not being asked to be gotten rid of. It's being asked to be the needs to be met. With pain, the needs are there to be met. There's not some maladaptive kind of wiring or some processing issue or problem that's you often see that. I mean, I argue this is just my take on it. I know others will have other opinions on it, but you think, well, with the hundreds of millions of people suffering across the world, I mean, is everyone's wiring going wrong? Or actually, are we just living in a different way to our design? And I would go towards the latter. I don't think everyone's going wrong. I don't think there's wrong with anyone because, I'm not my body. I'm not my pain anyway. I'm the one who witnesses it and experiences it.
No, I think there's an awful lot in there, isn't there? And I think there's an awful lot to explore. And yeah, I guess one of the things I took from that was it's about understanding what you're experiencing. And and again, these are my words, not the ones that it was my kind of interpretation of it, it's that being then curious. So if you use that anger analogy and someone said something to you and, and you feel angry, rather than, blaming the other person, almost lean in and look and go and being curious of what was it about that triggered me to be angry? And what's that saying about me? Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. What someone else says fundamentally is none of my business.
Yeah.
But if I make it my business, then, what are you looking at? What all that stuff.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I reflect back on something, a course I probably did 20 years ago. And it didn't land, I think, where I was in my life. It didn't land at all well when the guy told me, he said, well, if somebody's wound you up or made you angry, that's on you.
Yeah.
And at first, in that, 25 version of me was going, you're joking, they deliberately wound me up. And it landed awful because I went, right, I'm not taking that at all. And I think again, from my experiences, and over the last, 20 odd years, and leaning into curiosity, it's always helped me that when someone does say something and it doesn't land well or triggers or it sets an emotional response in myself, my first thing is to go, ooh, that's interesting. Let's explore that. In the moment, I might have to deal with that situation because I'm aware something's triggered me and I then move myself out of that situation so I don't, but certainly it's something then to reflect on would be.
Yeah. Yeah, you build your awareness, particularly if you practice meditation or mindfulness, you build up that energy through your practice and become increasingly aware. So it's not that you don't get triggered, it's just you realize when you do and you're noticing it rather than getting caught up in it. I always remember this guy, it always made me laugh a little bit, this story. He came to me and we worked a lot on this kind of stuff, on being mindful, on being present. And he wasn't familiar with it at all, but he was open to it, interestingly. Some people resist it. They're like, this sounds like a load of rubbish. And they'll have their beliefs, and that's why they say that. But anyway, he was open to it and was and for a fairly short period of time, actually, a matter of a few weeks. And he came in and he said, you know what? that stuff really helps. It really works." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I was out and with some family, and this situation arose, and normally I'd have punched him in the face, but you know what? I didn't. I just had a conversation with him." And I thought that was a great example
Yeah.
of how, that was the way, that was his way based on a set of beliefs about if someone says something that you don't like, you punch them on the nose. And, I'm not condoning that, by the way, but, that's what happened. And then he just had this sort of realization, the space to think that actually maybe there's another way of doing it, which is better and transformative in the long term.
Yeah, and I think that's lovely to hear because I think there's, the world I spend my time in, especially in founders and senior leaders, senior professionals, part of the things they come to with those emotional kind of things, aren't they? They've either gone into the feeling overwhelmed or the full of self doubt. You said those limited belief things are certainly a massive part. So I think what's really powerful about what you're saying, and what you're highlighting is giving people options to be like, actually, I don't have to be like this. And I've actually got choice, and there are ways around how to manage things better and become a different version if I choose to be.
Yeah, completely. Because, when you realize it's not what's happening as much as how you relate and respond that matters. I mean, that's one of the greatest insights you could ever have
Yeah.
because life just turns up, right? There's no, boom, it's just here. So I have no control over that. I have no control over outcomes,
Yeah.
but I do have control over how I relate and respond. And that's our superpower. And once you really get that, and once you really get that, what's happening is happening. And once you get that what has happened and couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't, and I quote that from Peter Crone, I always like to credit, um, that they are very, very powerful insights and truths, which when you come to know, radically transforms life. Or maybe it's not so radical because it's already available. You just didn't realize because you were caught up in old limiting beliefs.
No, but really, really powerful. So I think there's some absolute gold there. And, not like I would love, I'm going to listen back to this and I'll definitely be
Yeah.
taking some more stuff from this conversation. So, part of the audience are then, what I see an awful lot is founders and leaders then spend some time on self and, like you
Yeah.
said, and how to optimize themselves. And I think there's some really good ideas that's come out from you there. I guess the second part of this is how do we help others? So how do we unlock potential in other people? Is there, where do you go with that? Is there any kind of stories or go-to methods that you've used to help other people improve, unlock
Yeah.
potential in others?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I used to use words like, empowering and such like that. But I shifted my thinking on that because the person already has the power. They already have that key. That potential is already there, if we want to call it that. But then I sort of thought, well, what is potential? I mean, at the end of the day, what we've got is just this moment. So again, potential sort of implies a future, and the future doesn't exist. So we can quite easily get kind of caught up in that again and not being present. Because if you're not present, essentially you're not living. Now, the way that our minds work means that our minds do wander. We do go into the future. And I'm not saying you don't plan anything, by the way. It's not just like living by the seat of your pants and just doing whatever the hell you want. It's not that. You can be present and be planning. You can be present and be aware of the past, but you're firmly here and now with what is actually happening. And what's interesting is when I listen to people, they spend a lot of time drifting off back into the future and they say, "Oh, I'm feeling really scared about this now." Well, then you've got to be in the future.
Yeah.
Or I'm feeling really anxious about. Well, you've got to be in the future. And because our systems work on a predict and protect basis, they will do everything they can to help us avoid any difficult or challenging or traumatic or injuries or disease, whatever. Because that's their job is to keep us alive. So so frequently people are living because, when we think about doing something, or we think about being in a situation, our systems are doing very similar things to when we're actually there. So a lot of people are living out stuff that isn't happening, and their body systems are trying to protect them from it.
Mhm.
So they're not present. So they're not actually living. So what I want to do is, or what I do with people is I help them live. And that's why I call it living yourself better. Yes, it's living, but you can only be living if you're here and now, because nothing else exists, which to some people they get quite quickly, and other people are like, what the hell are you on about?
Yeah. But again, that's the great thing about people, isn't it? We are all different, and we all pick things up at different paces and different speeds. We're
Mm.
all more open. Some people are more open to things, some people more, and some people are less open to things. I guess the thing for me then is there any, let's say, for example, you're working with somebody. How is there anything that you can do to help them unlock their presence in themselves? So, I know you're obviously a very, very talented and very experienced coach, so you're very good at it.
Oh,
Yeah.
me.
That was the rumor. That's why I got you on. That was the yeah.
I don't know
Uh,
where that
um,
rumor came from.
Andy Thomas probably. So it was. I think you might have told me that yourself. How?
Did I tell you I was really
Yeah,
talented?
I thought so. Or maybe it was my interpretation of what you said. No, but that was, I guess, for me, one of the things that would be really, if you're comfortable exploring I know we talked about listening and being a good listener. And again, how do we help people, maybe in organizations that, as a leader, as a coach, as a mentor or somebody in an organization, how do you then help somebody else in a team, maybe somebody within your organization to help them become present so they can live a better life within an organization?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's good. It's a good question. I mean, certainly you've got to practice that, or there's a set of skills. You can practice mindfulness or meditation. And not, I mean, mindfulness is a kind of meditation, but it does go beyond that. So that's certainly something. Some people will call it focused attention training. I mean, you can call it different things depending on who you're working with. Um, but there's also foundational stuff to understand. I mean, obviously you've got to get to know the person.
Mhm.
And certainly if it's pain or something around health, or well, actually anything, you need to know the person, don't you? Because if you don't know the person, then you can't really understand why they're thinking the way that they think, and that needs to be, then you need clarity on that. And they also need to be open to learning. It's an iterative process. And I pay a lot of attention to detail. So in terms of the kind of more rehabilitation, exercise, movement type aspects of pain coaching, I pay a lot of attention to detail in that, in the preparation before. So the wraparound, the preparation before, truly personalizing what they do, and then a recharge time afterwards, and then reflection on that, and then learning from that, learning from what flare ups or challenging times, because you can view an obstacle as something in the way, or you can view it as an opportunity.
Yeah, I like that.
And obviously I'm going to go for the latter, because that's going to happen. You're not going to travel some flat easy road in life. It's just not how it is. That's not life. That's something else. So again, it's sort of getting the expectations in the right place, also on time frames. People that are in a rush to get better, or in a rush, well, again, they're getting lost in the future. How many in the physio world? How many sessions? I mean, it's complete nonsense when you really think about it. When the universe was created, however it was created, whatever force was behind it, was not sitting there going, right, if you've got back pain, in 10 sessions you're going to be better, or if you have migraines, 5 sessions will be better. I mean, it's
Yeah.
complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
Although, obviously the bean counters will go, well, yeah, but you've got to be able to say a number, da da da. So I kind of get that, but the problem is, if you're hooked into that kind of belief, and that you've got a really firm belief, or, well, this better work within a month or whatever, or my transformation as a leader or a manager or a founder need, you get really caught up again in something that isn't happening, rather than focusing on developing yourself and the skills that will then flourish. Yeah, so you've got to be watering the right seeds. And I often use that from a Buddhist analogy. You've got this, imagine a circle with a line across it. You've got the store consciousness underneath with all of the seeds of every experience you can imagine: joy, happiness, jealousy, guilt, hate, blah, 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 all the stuff, greed, everything there. And then you've got the upper part is your mind consciousness, where things appear. So the mind is really where everything appears. The mind isn't in here. No one's proven that. People, where's the mind? It's in my brain. No, it's not. You are your mind. There's no separation of mind and body. There's not even a connection. There's just one experience. So going back to you've got the seeds, seeds or store consciousness where all the seeds are, and then you've got the mind consciousness. So whatever seeds you're watering will appear in your mind consciousness. That's but if you think about it, that's really practical. Because if I'm sitting here feeling low, well, then I have to be focusing on something or thinking about something in a particular way. I have to be watering a particular seed in order to be feeling that.
Yeah.
So once I bring awareness to it and I know, well, this is what I'm focusing on, now I can look at it. Is that the truth of things? Is this right speech? Is this right thinking? So these are the eightfold path. Mindfulness is part of the eightfold path, by the way, which is the wholesome way to live. So am I, right action? Am I doing the right things? But if you've got wrong thinking to start with, then, like, for example, the causes of my pain are the disc in my back. The body tissues have no ability to generate a conscious experience. So first of all, that's wrong thinking. So you're going to end up with wrong action. So again, it stems back to beliefs and tidying those up to realize that something like pain or something like every experience we have is by dint of how the whole of me is in that moment. In other words, there's a set of conditions, which means this is all I could feel.
Now and again, there's an awful lot in there that's really, really helpful. And I guess trying to summarize stuff through, what I'm hearing is that, first of all, you've got to understand somebody else's view of the world, haven't you? And trying to see what's going on for them. What is it that they're feeling? What are they? And again, going into the beliefs that what's going on for them, understand them.
Yeah.
And then helping them in some way. I use my kind of analogy, shine a torch beam on different areas to say, look, I know this is where your view and this is all you're seeing and this is what you're feeling. But actually, if you look over there, that's different and that's different, and there are different ways to go. And I quite like that analogy, because if you're only watering the seeds that's maybe unhelpful or whatever, then actually that's what you're going to experience, isn't it?
Yeah. The caveat of this is important, though, that there's no blame here.
Yeah,
And
100%.
I genuinely believe, and this is, very much a compassion-driven approach, that everyone's doing the best they can with what they have at every point. They may not be getting the results that they want, but it doesn't mean that they're not doing their best. And I believe that they are. We will do our best according to, what the conditions are, and then because of that, what's available. So sometimes I use this analogy to help people understand that if you were to take a bowl, a mixing bowl, and put eggs, flour, milk, and sugar in, and then mix it up and put it in a hot oven, what do you get?
A cake?
A cake, yeah. You're not going to get chicken pie, are you? You relieved then. You relieved.
I was thinking, gosh, yeah.
You're not going to get chicken pie, are you? Because the conditions are such. So in other words, whatever I'm feeling now is what I'm feeling. Because people will often go, well, I shouldn't be feeling this. No, you are feeling it. So you should be. As soon as you believe you shouldn't, well, first of all, that's someone else's belief system, or you've drifted away from what's actually happening, which is the root cause of suffering, wanting things to be different to how they are. So this sort of ties in very much with acceptance and being open, which again are the things that we can train ourselves to get better and better at, because the more we resist how things are, the more we suffer.
Yeah, and I think, and I guess I love all of this, and I love these conversations. I guess the bit that's ringing out for me, which I'd like to explore if you're comfortable, let's, on a one-on-one, we both of us spend most of our time one-on-one. I can almost see how that path can be done through good conversation, good coaching, good listening. Is there anything around, if you're, say, that within team culture organization, is there any, do do you feel that there is any overlap that, how do we create an environment where it's encouraged, to, how do we encourage people in organizations to get the team to be present? How do we get them to kind of take some time to be mindful? Is there anything that you've seen in like someone who's done it well, or anything, and examples that you've seen that have worked well with teams?
Well, usually if I'm asked to help, it's because it's not working very well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
First people have got to understand why it's important, and one of the reasons why people don't feel that's important is maybe they've not been exposed to it, maybe they
Yeah.
haven't really come across it. It may not resonate for a number of reasons. If teams are driven by numbers, people are, yeah, but what about the numbers? What about the numbers? Well, the numbers take care of themselves. So it's kind of getting this understanding that, the score takes care of itself. Classic Bill Walsh book, by the way. So it's process over price. And if you're not aware, if you're not present, you can't be doing your best work. So how can we work together? What are we trying to achieve together here? And what do we all bring individually? And then what does that create collectively? And how can we all be rowing the boat in the same direction rather than 4 rowing this way and 9 rowing that way? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, I really like that. I think, and again, that's something which I know we've touched on it already, but it's, I think and again, it's a personal opinion rather than fact that, especially organizations that I've been invited into, actually some of the, before we can even, and I always start, so if I do any big team stuff with senior leaders, the first thing I do is almost a body scan to just go, okay, to just be aware of, or the presence, just, what is it that you come into today with, anything that's not helpful, or the version of you that's not helpful, is it aware? And we just ask them to breathe it out, but then be mindful of, okay, so, this is the agenda for today. What version of you and what thoughts do you need to bring into this conversation to make sure we all work together? So I almost do that for the first couple of minutes, which for the first time, if no one's done it, there's always one, there's like one eye open.
Yeah.
Going, what is this dude making me do? But it's always landed well. And by the time I've done it the second or third time, it gives people that moment. Because I always think when we come into meetings, you might have been on your email and you literally might have been sending that last email on a rush, or, you've not had a chance to eat yet and you've got to go and sit in this meeting for 3 hours. And the last thing you might think about is, I don't have time for this, which then obviously people come in stressed and with a lot of emotion. How do we then bring that all down to make sure it's, and that's something I experienced that a few times. It was really helpful just to go, oh God, when someone just even, I remember sitting there, just dead simple breathing exercise. They did little body scan and just said, right, just be aware, notice what you notice.
Yeah.
Notice what might be helpful, might not be helpful. And for me, it was like, oh wow, okay, it was really, really a powerful thing, which I've then gone, well, let's use that. And it has continued to be quite powerful to create an environment where people try and bring the best version of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. You're leading the way there and giving them the opportunity, and not everyone will necessarily know what it's all about or comfortable, but that's all information to work with. So you'll identify the people that might need some help and some clarification on that. I mean, one of the classic things that people misunderstand about these sorts of practices is but my mind wandered. I tried to quieten my mind, but there's no active way of doing that. There's no button to press. It happens by dint of your practice. But not always. Sometimes you sit and meditate and think about all sorts of stuff, and that's fine because everything is the object of meditation.
Yeah, and it's quite nice, isn't it? For sometimes, if you're listening, there is this assumption that like you've said, that we've got this noise in our head, and actually what things do is you've got to be completely, calm, all that stuff. And I think we all hold something, and that's the joys of being human, isn't it? We all, none of us are perfect, not even us.
No, no, and that's why I would call it a practice,
Yeah, I like that.
because and the more you can make it goalless, the more present you'll be to practice, which means you're going to get better results. The more it's focusing on the goals, that's like standing at the bottom of the mountain, looking up, wondering why you're not at the top without taking a step.
Yeah.
So a lot you start to notice there's a lot in people's conversations, or when you're practicing something together, they start talking about all sorts of things that aren't happening, and you're like, okay, where have you gone? Come back here. Oh yeah. And then off we go again. And so it's a practice. It's a way of being. Again, that's why I call it living yourself better, because we cultivate a way of being, which means that you're just getting more and more skillful at sailing your boat. Sometimes the wind is behind you, and you're just sort of gliding along, and other times it's choppy, and sometimes your boat capsizes.
Yeah.
But it's all an opportunity to learn, depending on the position that you take, and that is the choice. You don't have to keep looking at things in the same way, and in fact, if you do, you're likely to get not the same, because you can't have the same results. Nothing's ever the same. No moment's ever repeatable. Impermanence is a truth. Nothing is ever the same. Nothing is permanent. Things are always changing, even though they may not feel like it.
Mm. I like that. When things happen, there's always an opportunity to stop to think. Mm. So one of the things that's really important for me is that, because this conversation's been amazing. I would love having these conversations, and you always take my, like I said at the start, selfishly, you always take my thinking to a deeper level, which is selfishly why I have this podcast and do, because it's always improving me. It's always giving me moments, and it's deepening my thinking. What would be really helpful, what we're trying to do with this, is for people listening. I think there's been some pearlers. Could we just maybe give 3 practical things that listeners could try today?
Yeah.
Where would that land with you?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Some of the common things that I do with people to begin with, which would go right across the board, I would call these skills of being well. And we've talked about meditation and mindfulness, and to be present, to be able to focus, turns out to be a skill of being well. So people who are able to focus more tend to report being happier. So I would encourage that. And one of the ways that people could do that, there's lots of apps, but most of them I would say are a bit more like audio books than actual learning.
Okay.
So if you want true learning, then the app I've used it for years. Actually, I've used it since it began, and now it's an incredible resource. And I have no links to it. I just use it and recommend it. It's called Waking Up.
Okay.
Sam Harris, and it's an excellent resource because of the quality of the teaching. As I say, there's a lot of apps out there, a lot of popular apps, and and they say there's meditation for this and meditation for that. No, meditation is not for those things. People say, "Oh, I meditate to sleep better. I meditate." No, you're missing the point now.
Okay.
And that's what I mean by having a deeper understanding of the philosophy. And there's a lot of teaching on there, and conversations, and different teachers with different courses. Like Adyashanti's course is fantastic, and Joseph Goldstein's stuff's on there is brilliant. So there's some really, really high quality teachings to learn. But on a sort of a more day-to-day, or sort of more moment-to-moment basis, I should say, rather, I encourage people to check in regularly. So to take pauses. People say, I haven't got time. Or if we just wheel back on that a second, they might say, well, how often? And I might say, well, every hour. Well, I haven't got time to do that. And I would then say, well, then every half an hour.
I like it.
It's a bit like meditation. How long should I meditate for? Well, an hour. I haven't got time for that. Well, then 2 hours,
Yeah.
They're missing the point.
Yeah.
It's this idea, I haven't got time. It's just a concept. It's a narrative that they've identified with, and it's causing them stress, which is actually taking them away from truth and presence, and therefore, end up rather frantic and chaotic.
Yeah.
So everyone has the same amount of time.
I like that.
So it's more a matter of what matters to you, what's important. The thing is, if you take pauses through the day, and you check in, which is essentially just taking a moment, feel your body, see what's going on. You could even ask yourself the question, how am I? What are my needs right now? How can I best meet them? So that's a typical sort of 3-questioner that people can easily remember. And we need prompts. If you look at this sort of map of motivation, ability, and prompts, we need all 3 to perform a habit. That seems to have pretty good evidence behind it, and it makes sense. So, having reminders to do so. What I often encourage people to use the Plum Village app, which is a free app, which has the mindful bell, which you can set to chime on a regular basis. It's a lovely sound. It sounds like the one they use in Plum Village, which is a monastic community in France that was set up by Thich Nhat Hanh years ago. And when they ring the bell in the village, everybody stops. They put their tools down, whatever they're doing in the kitchen, the garden, whatever it is, sweeping, and come back to what will be called home. And home is the present moment. So you just come back to your breathing, and it gives you the opportunity to see where you are and what's actually happening there. Another simple one, motion is lotion. So every cell of the body needs regular movement. If you're plonked in a chair for hours, and by the way, there's no such thing as a good or bad posture. But if you're plonked in a chair for hours, try something like that for 10 hours.
Yeah.
Then just bring movement on a regular basis. And 1 rep is better than none. So, you don't have to spend ages doing these things. I call them micro practices. So if you feed your day or, through the day with micro practices of movement and presence and breathing, I mean, that alone can transform things.
No.
Let alone the other stuff you can do to build your wellness and to be on a particular path.
No, really, really powerful stuff there. And I've wrote those down, and I'll make sure they're in the show notes for the listeners. So one principle you wish I've put every leader or every person understood. Is there anything that where would that question land with you?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of, I sometimes say to people, if there was only one thing that I was allowed to do with you, if there was one gift that I could give, if there was any sort of one, it's not a therapy as such, but if, as a clinician, the one thing, it would be presence. Because when you're present, you can see what's happening. And at the end of the day, if you're present and you can see what's happening and you're getting as close to truth as possible, then you're alive, then you're living. Whether you like it or not is another matter. But that's irrelevant to whether it's happening. Because if it's happening and couldn't be happening any other way. So that's what we're working with, or that's what we're meeting. And how am I meeting it? Well, if I'm present, I can feel that. I know what's going on, and I can then update it if I need to, because if it's not working for me, it's showing where I need to transform. If it is working for me, great, I can feel that.
Nice. Really nice. Last question. So we've had a really good conversation. I think you have, well, I know it's not think, brought lots of value to this conversation. And I know people listening are going to have gone, right, okay, there's so much in this. And one of the things for me then, and it might be a challenge. So one of the things we always do, we finish with a challenge for our audience. So I guess if you were to, how to turn some of this information into action, would there be a challenge that you might set the listeners to do to ensure that actually they take all this good stuff and actually do something with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing that they could do, which may not seem like a challenge as I describe it, but go and do it, and then you'll see. Find a really empty room and go and sit in it for 10 minutes with nothing to do.
Okay. Really? Yeah. I'll try that.
So don't take your phone in, don't take anything in there. Just go and sit there for 10 minutes.
On the floor? On a seat?
Wherever you
Doesn't matter, just sit.
Just go and sit for 10 minutes.
Right. I'm up for it. And would be really interesting. Share your pictures if you're sitting in a room.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And your experiences. What is
Yeah. Or at least share your experiences, because you won't have your phone in there to take a picture. No, that's, listen, I've loved this. You are one of those individuals where I feel like I could talk to for hours, but I know you're a busy man, so I'll wrap it up, and thank you very much. Can you just give listeners that, how they can get hold of you, where they can follow you,
Yeah, no,
Really good.
absolutely. So I've got a Substack newsletter called Pain Talking. There's hundreds of articles on there you can dig through. I write about this stuff all the time. Pain Coach on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. You know, you can come and connect with me there. My website is my name, richmondstace.com. So you can easily find me with my name. So.
No, that's brilliant. And I know you've got your own little podcast.
Yeah, so I had one a while ago called The Encourager, and all those episodes are available, different people talking about their stuff and how they encourage people. And then I'm doing one with Andy called The Lunch Huddle, which is looking largely at sort of communication and ways of being with people. And I've got another one coming soon, yet to be titled, which will be going even deeper into those kinds of
Oh,
things
nice.
with more of a therapeutic kind of edge to it.
And that's the lunch huddle.
So no, the lunch huddle is with Andy.
All right, and you've got another one coming
And then
soon.
there's another one coming,
Right.
which I'll announce once we've sort of got it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but it's all sharing, you know, hopefully practical things of value, you know, getting this stuff out there and sharing it. You know, there's no point sort of holding it here, because we want to reach as many people as possible so that people can realize that, you know, possibility and freedom's available in whether it be pain or running a team or a business or whatever, you know, freedom and possibility, right?
Yeah, you're really good at that as well. I think the information you do put out is very articulate. It's very easy to understand, and I think that's, you know, and is driven from the passion you have for this, which I think comes across every time in the conversation. It's lovely to hear. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up with everybody?
And I think that just the fact that we have amazing abilities as humans, amazing abilities, and even more so when you come together like we do, you know, that synergy, the energy that comes from that, you know, we're all creators, we're all creative, and we're all doing our best, you know, and sort of muddling through, and the more we can help each other. And I would encourage people to, even if you're not sort of thinking about becoming a monk, a Buddhist monk, to just explore the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Just have a look. You can find just very brief, you know, descriptions of it, and I think you'll find it very relevant, even though it's written 2,600 years ago,
Right.
to living well. And it's the basis of most of the work I do with people, because when you do those things, your life transforms.
Nice. I think that'll be that'll be something I will explore after this. So thank you ever so much as always. Really appreciate it, and look forward to part 2 hopefully soon.
Yeah, cool. Always happy to. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being on.